The story revolves around a long-haul space freighter called Tulpar, operating under the company called Pony Express with a crew of 5 people, set on a long journey taking 382 days in order to transport very important items being of high sensitivity and confidential, with the crew members even being unaware of what they are carrying. Knowing how important this mission is, the crew members take their role seriously and have been on the way in space for 147 days, having more than half the way left to continue. The storyline is jumbled up, and the first scene starts with a flashback of the past events being 5 days before a crash which would leave the ship stranded in space. The scene shows the perspective of the ship's captain known as Curly, who is having a regular psychological welfare examination conducted by Anya, the ship's medical examiner, a session which is part of the policy taking place once every 2 months to monitor the crew's mental health. After being too used to the psychological evaluation, Curly has a banter with Anya, with the flashback skipping to another point of time, with jumbled letters appearing on the screen which could be deciphered to take responsibility, which hints out that the captain, despite dismissing the psychological examination as something unnecessary, is being haunted by the thoughts of lacking responsibility. That's when, in the new segment of the flashback, he finds a poster of a cartoon mascot known as Polly, possibly a mascot they used to advertise their company's services of being a freight ship, delivering and transporting goods through space. It's clear the universe of the game takes place in a period of future or in an alternate dimension where humans have conquered and achieved interspace travel to the point where they possibly live in different planets and have shipment services from planet to planet. But yet, it's not very accessible and easy for them to just go from planet to planet, as this mission alone takes more than 1 year. As the captain goes corridor to corridor, opening the safety doors, he is hunted by more posters on top of each other, with an actual physical embodiment of the mascot following the captain in a sneaky and creepy manner. That's when it's revealed this flashback is of the time that the ship had crashed, creating the immense psychological stress that he experienced, to the point that he thought that the world is crashing on them, even hallucinating a little. The flashback is then cut short, with it changing to another point of time, being another crew member's perspective, called Jimmy. It is 2 months after the crash, being stranded with not much hope of being rescued left, with Jimmy sitting on a table alongside the other crew members. Daisuke is desperate to find out what cargo they are carrying, as it could be food or other important items which could help them with their predicament. But on the other hand, Swansea is steadfast in not touching the cargo as they are responsible for it, knowing the hold is locked as they are not supposed to touch anything, worrying about not getting paid at the end of the job, still being hopeful that they will be rescued. Anya also seems to be on board as well, wanting to find out what the cargo is, with all agreeing to somehow bypass the secure door and break into the cargo storage and find out what they're carrying, as they believe it has been long enough and they are in a state of emergency. Jimmy seems to be the one in lead now, making the decisions and giving orders. Going around the ship, it's shown how the safety system kept everyone alive, deploying insulation foam to seal all the compromised parts of the ship, which otherwise would have exposed them to the outer space. Moving on and entering the medical room, a ghastly sight reveals what happened to Captain Curly after the crash, leaving him on the brink of death with his entire body wrapped in bandages and parts of his body badly mutilated and severed. Anya, who seems to have a close friendship with Curly, stands by him all the time, watching over him, displaying how much she cared about him and how distressed she is now. Jimmy having a chat with Anya, he displays his superiority complex on how he belittles Anya and her position as a nurse, insulting her on how incompetent she is. That's because she explains that she cannot give Curly his pain medication as he doesn't stay still and makes agonizing noises which she cannot stand. Getting nervous and lost for words, Anya referring to Curly as the captain who needs more painkillers to soothe his pain, Jimmy snaps at her saying that he is not worthy of this title, as if this displaying he was always jealous of him and wanted to overtake him, insinuating that Curly is a liability and a burden now. It's not clear why he shows so much hostility towards Curly, but it's a possibility that he blames the crash on him and the subsequent outcome of how everyone else is stranded, barely getting by and living their last days in a death trap in the middle of space. That's when he takes some painkillers and gives them to Curly, giving him some reassurance when Anya runs away, saying that she cannot take the difficult to stomach noises Curly makes. As Jimmy leaves Curly, he comes across Anya crying on her knees, who questions Jimmy why he would do it. It seems as if the crew members have the belief that Curly crashed the ship on purpose, possibly due to a mental breakdown, disregarding every other crew member on board. That's why Jimmy disregarded him of his title, being a captain. Despite everyone believing Curly wanted to intentionally crash the ship and take everyone down, they all voted to keep him alive. Catching up with Daisuke, who seems to be a young man, he informs Jimmy that they only have 4 months supply of food left, with even less supply of oxygen, lasting shorter. Despite the gravity of the situation, Jimmy is still hopeful, as he believes that they would still manage to survive if they get back on track. Daisuke, who doesn't seem to be in a panic yet, explains how this will be a crazy story to tell, who would surely get fame after being published in articles and news, displaying how they are not feeling the dread of dying here yet. Moving on and reading the posters up close, the strict rules the Pony Express imposes on its crew members is revealed on how they force them to have only 5 hours of sleep, deliver on time, work effectively together, and to prevent accidents, as otherwise the company wouldn't take any accountability for injuries, and any damage or lack of punctuality or late delivery would result in the crew members having their pay deducted. This goes to explain why Swansea was so worried about having his pay withheld if they would break to the cargo room. It's a little ironic the company chooses to use a cartoony and friendly mascot to promote their services and quality and characteristics, while the small subtext bears harsh messages to the employees, reminding them of the rules and the punishments that they would face if they are broken. As Jimmy finds a code scanner from the cockpit, which took the most damage, being covered in insulation foam, he observes how the rest of the crew members are waiting anxiously to find out what's in the cargo. Swansea and Daisuke hope to find mechanical parts so maybe they can fix the ship as they are the engineers, while Anya hopes that they would have medication and food and water, as her role is being a nurse. As Jimmy manages to open the cargo door, he is haunted by the same jumbled words that Curly was to take responsibility when he notices hundreds of boxes stacked and shelved neatly. He then finds a TV left on statics in the dead end of the cargo room when he finally stumbles on a channel which advertises a mouthwash by the company called Dragon Breath. This is clearly a misplaced item and a strange commercial to play on TV, which seems as if Jimmy is experiencing what Curly experienced just before the crash, as if hallucinating. That's when Jimmy blacks out with the time jumping with him finding an opened box in front of him being full of mouthwash liquid. Not sure what he experienced was real or not. He doesn't have much time to process that, as the biggest problem and worry lays right in front of him, with all the cargo that they were instructed to transport being thousands of Dragon Breath mouthwash liquid bottles. All the crew members coming into the cargo room, horrified to finding what's been labeled as highly confidential items, something that they were withheld from finding out. They all seem to have a breakdown as they were hopeful to find something more useful. Something worthy of interspace transportation, something that would take over 1 year of traveling to transport. That's when Swansea reads the content of the mouthwash, reading that it contains 14% ethanol, which in other words is drinkable alcohol. Swansea, being 13 years sober, starts chugging down the mouthwash as he is clearly feeling the dread kicking in, losing hope of ever getting out of here alive, eventually facing a brutal death in open space. Anya, watching this, starts shaking uncontrollably, seeing how dread is kicking in all of them, drinking something that would actually kill them, with Swansea even encouraging Daisuke to drink with him, saying that she cannot believe what she's seeing, unable to think straight. That's when the time jumps, with Jimmy finding himself in the medical room, where Curly is in. The jumbled letters appear once more, with Jimmy sitting upright and able to talk now, as if feeling much better. It seems as if some time has passed since they found out what they've been carrying. Talking to Curly, he doesn't make much sense, implying on how life has never been peaceful to him, with him always struggling to find stability and consistency, always having ups and downs. That's when he asks Jimmy to find a knife so they can cut the birthday cake that is in front of them. Again, another unlikely scenario, indicating Jimmy is hallucinating, as if having a mental breakdown. It is very unlikely for them to have a birthday cake while being on rations, soup and noodle, with Curly sitting upright all of a sudden wanting to eat a cake alone with Jimmy. Nonetheless, Jimmy goes on to find a knife to cut the cake, finding bottles upon bottles of the mouthwash scattered all over the ship as if they have been drinking them non-stop. With no sign of Swansea, Daisuke and Anya anywhere to be seen, Jimmy goes to the cockpit where he finds an axe lodged on the captain's chair with blood splatter. He takes the axe without any questioning, when all of a sudden eyes appear on the monitors, which were only displaying error and warning sign after the crash, with a thought popping inside Jimmy's mind to feast. Without questioning any of this being completely abnormal, he goes back to Curly, where he finds him in the main hall with no sign of any other crew member and a massive eye on the big screen. Strangely, the still living body of Curly is lying on the table, with him back to his poor condition, unable to speak and no sign of the birthday cake anywhere, depicting how what Jimmy saw and experienced earlier was nothing but hallucination due to despair. It's bizarre where everyone else is as well, and why he took a bloodied axe, with a thought instructing him to feast, while there's no cake and the badly injured yet still living and breathing Curly is lying on the table. Without much hesitation, Jimmy raises the axe and hacks at the defenseless body of Curly. So it's clear what this feast meant. The scene cuts to 5 days before the crash again, with Anya examining Jimmy this time around in the medical room. The conversation is obscured and Anya's professional opinion is not revealed as Jimmy takes over, saying that some animals do better in a cage, while some gnaw at their own limbs and some other, which cuts there, with Jimmy not saying what he wants to say, with quick images of Curly being shown. So what really went down in the ship? What caused the crash and what happened at the end after the crew members found the mouthwash? It seems as if Jimmy had something to do with it, despite putting all the blame on Curly on how he was the one who crashed the ship intentionally, as he couldn't take the long duration of captivity anymore. Essentially, they were trapped in a metal box for over 5 months with only 5 crew members. Towards the end, we can clearly see Anya had something to say about Jimmy's mental health status, which he cuts short, manipulating Anya, saying some animals do better in a cage compared to others, referring to the ship as the cage and themselves as animals. He displays psychotic tendencies, hence why saying to Anya, it's better for others not to know. It's also clear that he had some sort of hostility towards Curly, not wanting him to be called a captain anymore. In his psychological evaluation, referring to him as the other animals, implying that the other animals become the victims, meaning how Curly became his victim. So this in a way gives us a clue to what could have happened in the beginning, leading to the crash. During the crash, we see how the jumbled words appear in yellow color tone for Curly, when posters upon posters of the mascot appear, when the ship starts crashing and being compromised and the mascot following Curly. Curly is not seen in the cockpit and runs towards the cockpit to control the crash when he realizes a door is locked, with the mascot behind him, changing the perspective to Jimmy 2 months later. So it's clear Curly wasn't the one who actually crashed the ship, especially not how they described it. Jimmy explains how they found him in the cockpit, badly mutilated, assuming that he wanted to crash the ship and end everyone's life, as he was in a bad mental state. So it's clear that the Captain Curly did not actually crash the ship, or at least intentionally, and he was not in the cockpit during the crash, and he was actually running to get to the cockpit to presumably stop the crash. So it seems that the mascot was behind it all, but is there any supernatural force in play, or did one of the crew members wear the mascot suit to compromise the mission and the ship? Keep this thought as we'll get back to it a little later. After opening the cargo room and finding out what they've been transporting, everyone starts losing their mind, leading to some time later with no other crew member being seen anymore. There are piles of empty mouthwash bottles, which implies that Swansea probably drank so much, even inviting Daisuke to drink with them, which could have led to their death, as they are not seen any longer, and the mouthwash, despite having ethanol, has some other contents which are poisonous or not safe for mass consumption. There's also blood in the cockpit, which suggests murder taking place with the axe Jimmy finds. With the backstory we have of him on how the psychological evaluation implied he is not in a good mental state and how he is the last man standing, it could imply that he was the culprit behind Anya possibly dying. Swansea and Daisuke probably drank and died, but Anya was against drinking the mouthwash, so the only way we could say she died, especially with someone's blood in the cockpit, could be Anya's. When Jimmy even picks up the axe, eyeballs appear on the screens and the thought burrows in Jimmy's head to feast. That leads to him killing Curly and most likely eating him. He even hallucinated of sharing a birthday cake with Curly, talking about the ups and downs of life before killing him, displaying how Curly never was able to talk after the crash. Also, Jimmy explains Curly sustained these injuries from the crash being in the cockpit, but in fact wasn't, so it's most likely someone from the crew mutilated him, painting it as an accident from the crash. It's very likely the hunger got to Jimmy and he started eating the crew members to satiate his hunger, as Daisuke mentions how they are on rations of soup and chicken noodles. There are also the jumbled letters in red color, which Jimmy sees, in comparison to the lighter yellow color tone Curly sees, which could both have different interpretations. For Jimmy, it could mean how he needs to take responsibility for his actions and evil deeds, while for Curly it means how he needs to fight and save the crew members. This leaves us to the crash and who the mascot could be and what really happened to Curly, which I believe was all Jimmy to begin with. He showed signs of psychotic breakdown, saying how some animals in cages will be victims and how some will do just fine, while some other will lose their minds and gnaw at their limbs. So essentially, he referred to himself as the one animal doing just fine, while Swansea and Daisuke will be the animals gnawing at their own limbs, displaying how they lost hope, and Anya and Curly being the victims. Jimmy possibly lost his mind being on the ship for so long, possibly being the only one who knew what they're carrying, displayed from the TV commercial that he sees, which seems to be a hallucination, a memory that is embodied in the TV commercial, hence why he lost his mind, caused the crash, and went on killing and eating others, as he was sick of eating just soup and noodles. What do you think really happened? Keep in mind that this is just a demo as well, and we'll figure out much more about the story when the full game comes out. As always, it's been your host Star. Thanks for being here, and I will see you on the next one. Have a fantastic day.